So April was a pretty wild ride. Now it's actually looking like spring outside. And before Easter I talked about reading crime fiction, but I ended up not reading as much as I hoped. I actually ended up carrying a lot of wood and chopping some wood. So if someone has a cheap tractor to sell me, please get in contact. And after 2 years, the flea markets have suddenly opened again, and it has been rough, which you are going to see in my next book haul. If I ever have the time to make it, because I have already bought many books, and next weekend there's also a lot of flea markets going around. And a couple of days before I'm sitting here now, I came back from my trip to Budapest, my first time in Budapest, and also my first trip in ages. So that was really nice, even though I had to spend one night too many at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, also losing my luggage, which I recently just got hold of. I got to do a lot of reading on the plane, which is really nice, but I didn't get to do a lot of literary activity outside of the things I had already planned. But I visited this one bookshop, which unfortunately was fully booked when I got there, so I just had a browse. But it was a really nice place, and thank you for the recommendation I got on this YouTube channel. Summed up, it was a really busy month, so I only got to finish these 4 small/medium-sized books. But I'm sort of 90% finished with Independent People by Halvor Laxness, but also I'm 80% finished with A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. So they could have both been on this video, but next time it will be a bigger video, I guess. The first one I started reading was Gangster Granny by David Walliams, my first children's novel this year, and David Walliams has released just so many books. I chose this one because it seemed quite funny. Ben is visiting his grandma all the time just because his parents are looking at Dancing with the Stars and being in the audience. They have to set him away to his grandmother, and there they only eat cabbage, and that's basically what they do. And he is not enjoying it too much. He sort of thinks that his grandma is the most boring person ever. But one day he realizes that she has been an international jewel thief, and he sparks an interest. Then they both set out to steal the crown jewels. So that's basically the setup, which I find very intriguing and fun. First of all, I have to say I like children's novels because there are no limits to what can happen. And there can be so many plot holes, but it doesn't really matter. Also, the fact that some people just are unproportionately mean or angry. And this is of course the case with this novel as well. There's one neighbor who really just have no character development at all, and he's just way too mean. I couldn't think of which age group this book is appropriate for. I think a lot of ages could really enjoy it. I was a bit surprised of how deep it went regarding the relationship between Ben and his grandmother. It really got a bit emotional at some point, which I really enjoyed. It could have gone deeper also, but that would have made the book twice its size. I wouldn't have minded that, but I understand they didn't. I was also surprised by the plot at some points in the book, and that's a great thing. I thought at some point I had it all figured out, but suddenly things changed and I was happy. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I read it in 2 sittings, which isn't often for me. It's not a big book. It seems bigger than it is, which is the best thing that could have happened to my reading life because of the shelf space. For those who follow me on Instagram, you already know that I've picked up like 6 of his books this month, and that only means that I'm going to have a lot of fun the rest of the year also. And if you don't follow me on Instagram and you want to, there's a link in the description which take you straight there. Then I started reading An Ode to Darkness by Sigrid Sandberg, a Norwegian author. And this book is about conquering her fear of the dark while explaining why the darkness is a positive thing for us and why we need it, and how our relationship towards darkness has developed through the years. I thought this was going to be a fiction novel, but it's not. It's sort of a mix between her telling a story about herself and her personal life while taking in statistics from the outside. And so she goes up to this cabin in the middle of nowhere, and she spends as many nights as she could deal with, And alongside this story, she also talks about an Austrian writer who moved to Svalbard and lived there for a couple of months and wrote a book about it. She's called Christiane Ritte and has also written a book about the experience, which I'm wondering about reading myself. So this book is split into the days she spent on the cabin, and we get to see the progression in her thoughts and her experiences. I really enjoyed the style it was written in, sort of a mix between fiction and non-fiction. Even though everything's non-fiction, it felt like something was fictionalized, which made me read the story faster and made me feel like the story was more engaging. So in that aspect, I really enjoyed it. Also, the topic really got me. It is an interesting thing, and as I talked about in the book review I made of this book, each time I come to my own cabin I'm sort of in awe of the darkness, and suddenly I can look at the Milky Way and look at the different stars, and it's a really different experience than it is just going into the darkness when you live close to a city or something like that. It can't really compare. Also an easy read, not a lot of pages, and for all you Jon Fosse fans, this book is also filled with Jon Fosse poems, so that might intrigue some of you. On the front cover here it says, "I would like to have moved into this book," and that's how it feels, because the atmosphere is dark, it's very intimate, cozy, and you sort of feel like you want to be alone after you've read this book. That sounded more sad than it was supposed to be, but you get my point. I really recommend this book if you're interested in the topic of darkness and looking at the stars. Before I went to the cabin for Easter, I made a video about Easter reads and Norwegians' relationship towards crime fiction. I didn't think I would actually read crime fiction this year, but I thought I would read this book and it appeared to be a crime fiction, so that's a win-win situation. This is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This is a Nobel Prize winner, and when I read about this book, people said that this is no ordinary Nobel Prize winner book. And I've read some Nobel Prize winners before, but basically they have all been older classics, so the writing style there completely differs from what I've read in this book. This book is about Janina, who is an older woman living in Poland on the border to the Czech Republic. And this is a really rural place, and one day one of her neighbors turns up dead, and she sets out to investigate. And in that process, several other people close by also end up dead. I really enjoyed this book as well, but I also struggle a bit to talk about it just because that is the basic plot. There's a lot of people involved, like the police and people going hunting and a lot of local people, but mainly that is the plot. And the thing that makes this book special, I would say, is Janina herself, because she is pretty weird. She collects birth dates and when people died. She's also really immersed in the world of horoscopes, which takes up a very big part of this novel. Also, she is very fond of animals, and animals plays a huge part in both her life and in the story that is this book. You also have this environmental theme, I would say, regarding insects, which also is a theme of this book. I have thought about reading the books of Jacob, just because that's a huge brick by the same author that seems so intimidating that I really want to read it. I read this one before just to ensure that I would be able to read that brick, and the language in this novel is really easy. It's fast paced, so sort of made for me in that sense, but also it has a surprisingly coarse language. Janina doesn't leave anything untold. Everything's laid on the table in a very honest manner, and I get a bit surprised each time I read a book where this happens, because I never read books where the language is so not direct but a bit rough, I would say. The only book I can think of is Tore Renberg's Tollak to Ingeborg, which I read last year, and that also has a brutal language from an old grumpy man, and that's sort of the only other book I know. But I thought the language was a really good fit for this book, because it sort of just made an even clearer picture of Janina. This book is really suitable for Norwegian Easter, and I do recommend it. It put me right on the border to the Czech Republic, where I haven't been too much, and that is always a good sign. I felt like I really was a part of Janina's, not brain, but at least her area outside her house. So, also very happy with this one. Let's just see if I read the Books of Jacob at some point. If someone has read it, comment below if you think that it's something for me. I doubt it, but it would look great in the shelf. Then I've come to the last book this month, and I recently made a video about this. So if you're interested in more thoughts around this book, you can check out my review. But it's Fredrik Backman's Britmaie Was Here. For those who have watched my videos, you know that this is an author I think I could form a really close relationship to. And after reading this book, I'm only wondering which Backman book will be the next one I read. So this story also is about an older woman who recently left her husband. She's now looking for a job, and we meet her when she's talking to a social worker. Britmaie is a really socially awkward person, and she doesn't really know how to handle people. All she knows is that she needs a job because she doesn't have her husband in her life anymore. It's also important to her to stand on her own feet, and she'll basically take any job she offers. Britmaie doesn't really have any job experience, and the social worker struggles to find her a job, but she can find her a part-time job at a recreation center for youth in a small place called Borg. Britmaie immediately takes this job and sets her course towards Borg without any real knowledge about the job, but that doesn't matter. Here she meets a lot of youth, and she ends up being a football coach. That's sort of part of the job description. But Britmaie doesn't really know anything about football, and that's a part of the fun. I do not watch any football, but I really loved this book, and it was an immediate 5-star for me. It started out kinda slow and kinda repetitive, where Britmaie talked about herself in the third person, just emphasizing how weird she was. But after the first few chapters, it sort of picked up the pace. And if you've read the book A Man Called Ove or watched the movie, I've only watched the movie, you sort of don't like Ove in the start, and you don't like Britmaie in the start, but you end up loving them both, and that's sort of Backman's deal, I guess. He makes these people into lovable people that you never want to let go, and you sort of want to take care of. So Britmaie left her husband, and it's not because he was abusive physically, but I would say he was an ass and mentally abusive, and this is not anything Britmaie says. She just talks about the relationship, and it's up to us as readers just thinking about how that would have been being in that relationship. And I sort of end up fighting for her in my own head. And that of course only makes this book even more impactful. I would say that Backman really generalizes sometimes, especially when it comes to people and football and their emotions, but I think it's more fun than not, and often he stays on the right side of that thin line. This book could have had a huge number of sequels just because there are so many people in the book you start to love, but I'm glad it's not. I think this is the perfect amount of Britmaie for me. So a clear 5-star to end this month. So these are the books I chose for this month, and I can't say anything other than I'm really happy with my own effort. I wanted to read books I thought I'd really enjoy, and that's what I ended up doing, because I don't think I gave any of these less than 4 stars, which is the first month ever. I started reading Independent People by Halvor Laxness in between these 2 books, but I had to take a break and go over to Britmaie, so that's also a win. Even though I'd continued reading Independent People now, I'm sort of satisfied with my own action of putting down that book and picking up this one. I think that's a sign of maturity for me as a reader. But each time I think I will get ahead of my reading schedule. That's why I started the month with these 2. But then I go on and pick up Independent People, and it takes just a lot of time. So in May I will also try to get ahead of my reading schedule with 2 to 3 books. I'm sort of right on the schedule now. So that will be my next challenge. So hopefully there will be a lot of books in the next wrap-up video. So this was April. Welcome May. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and have a wonderful reading May, if that's something you might say. Or just have a wonderful May, and I hope you get to read good books, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!